my friends. I'm glad you are here. Tonight, we journey back in time to the golden sands of Egypt, to a world of towering temples and the gentle lull of the Nile. We will step into the life of one of the most brilliant and strategic women in history, Cleopatra, a queen of intelligence, diplomacy, and power. Before we begin, if you enjoy these stories, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Your support means so much to me, and it allows me to bring more stories like this. Now, take a deep breath. Slowly now. Inhale, filling your lungs with calm, and exhale gently, letting go of any tension. Feel yourself sink deeper into the softness of your bed. Close your eyes, my friend, and let yourself relax completely. Let's start our story. It is the year 69 BC, a time of both calm and turmoil, a time of great change. And in the city of Alexandria, in a grand palace overlooking the vast Nile River, a child is born, Cleopatra. Cleopatra's birth was no ordinary event, for she was not just any child. She was the daughter of Ptolemy XII, a pharaoh of Egypt. She was born into a world of power, of beauty, and of intrigue, a world where the balance of life and death was held in the hands of a few. Her mother, Cleopatra of Tryphina, gave birth to this future queen in the royal palace, surrounded by the sounds of the Nile, the hustle and bustle of a city that was a melting pot of cultures, and the whispers of history. Alexandria was a place of great learning, of scholars and philosophers, and as Cleopatra's first breaths filled the warm air, the world around her began to change. Now, close your eyes and imagine the warm Egyptian. Feel the soft desert breeze as it dances through the palace corridors. The air, fragrant with the scent of spices and the river's waters, carries a sense of history. Cleopatra's first breath is drawn into a world that would soon know her name. But what of her family? Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, was not the most powerful or beloved ruler, but he was a man of strategy. He ruled Egypt, but his rule was fragile, marked by internal struggles and external threat. The royal family was always at odds, each member vying for power and influence. Cleopatra's mother, Cleopatra V, was a queen in her own right, though her name is often lost to history. It is said she was a woman of great strength, and the bond between mother and daughter was likely one of deep love and understanding. Yet the circumstances of Cleopatra's early life were far from peaceful. Her family's reign was under constant threat, and the royal palace, with its tall marble pillars and grand courtyards, was often filled with tension. The sounds of the palace at night were unlike any other. You could hear the distant calls of the Nile as it flowed endlessly by, the low murmurs of the court advisors, and the rustle of the luxurious fabrics that lined the royal chamber. But beyond the beauty and the riches, there was a sense of danger, a reminder that power in Egypt was never truly secure. Cleopatra was not born into a world of peace, but into one of struggle, a world where the throne was always in jeopardy. She had several siblings, each one vying for their share of power. Her older sister, Berenice IV, ruled Egypt for a time, but was eventually deposed, and her younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, would later become key figures in Cleopatra's story. Her family's relationships were often strained, with political rivalries turning into open warfare. But Cleopatra's destiny was different from the others in her family. She was not just a child of the royal bloodline. She was a child of intelligence, of ambition, and of dreams far beyond the palace wall. Now, imagine, my friend, that you are in the quiet of the palace. You hear the soft rustle of Cleopatra's silk robes as she grows from a baby into a young girl. The soft, warm breeze blows through the palace windows, and you feel yourself becoming more and more relaxed with each passing moment. The city of Alexandria, with its rich history and bright future, is just outside waiting for this child to take her place in history. The palace of Alexandria was vast, its marble halls stretching endlessly, its golden pillars bathed in the warm glow of oil lamps. Outside, the city hummed with life. The murmurs of merchants in the great marketplace, the distant sound of waves lapping against the harbor, the occasional neigh of a horse-drawn chariot passing through the street. And within these grand walls, a young Cleopatra was growing, watching, listening, learning. The royal family was large, but it was not warm. Cleopatra had several siblings, each born into the same world of power and politics. There was her older sister, Berenice IV, who would later seize the throne in her father's absence. Then there were her younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, who would one day become both her rivals and her allies. There was also her younger sister, Arsinoe IV, whose story would be intertwined with Cleopatra's in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Life in the palace was not one of carefree childhood gain. From an early age, Cleopatra understood that her family was always walking a thin line between power and ruin. There were whispers in the halls, quiet discussions in darkened chambers, and always the tension of knowing that alliances could be broken as quickly as they were formed. But Cleopatra was different. She was not like her siblings, who fought for power with brute force or reckless ambition. No, Cleopatra was watching. She was learning. She was listening. From a young age, she adored learning. She was not content with simply being a princess. She wanted knowledge, wisdom, understanding. She spent hours in the Grand Library of Alexandria, surrounded by ancient scrolls and scholars from distant lands. While other children of the court played games of pretend, Cleopatra studied languages. She listened to the Greek philosophers. She read Egyptian hymns. She practiced Latin. She learned Aramaic. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra made it a point to learn the Egyptian language, something most of the Greek Ptolemaic rulers never did. Imagine now the soft rustling of papyrus as she traces her fingers over the delicate inscriptions. The library is vast, its towering shelves filled with knowledge from all over the known world. The air has smells of old parchment, of candle wax, of ink. The flickering light of the oil lamps dances across her young face as she reads, as she blabs, as she prepares herself for life that awaits her. But beyond the books, Cleopatra was also a child of the city. She loved to watch the great ships come into the harbor of Alexandria, their sails billowing in the wind. She loved the sound of the sea, the feeling of the warm sun on her skin, the way the scent of spices and flowers drifted through the street. She was not a princess locked away in a tower. She wanted to know her people, to understand them. Unlike her siblings who saw power as something to be seized, Cleopatra understood that true power was something to be earned. She watched her father, Ptolemy XII, as he struggled to keep control of Egypt. She listened to the way he spoke, the way he negotiated, the way he relied on the power of Rome to keep his throne. She saw the weakness in his rule, and she knew that if she were ever to wear the crown, she would have to be strong. No, but childhood was not all politic. Cleopatra, like all children, had moments of joy. She loved music, the sound of the lyres and harps that filled the palace halls. She loved the art of perfumery, learning the delicate balance of oils and herbs to create fragrances fit for a queen. She loved listening to stories, tales of the gods, of heroes, of pharaohs, long before her time. The nights in Alexandria were warm, the air thick with the scent of lotus flowers and myrrh. Cleopatra would lie awake, gazing up at the stars, the same stars that had guided Egyptian priests and mathematicians for centuries. She wondered about the future. She wondered about her place in history, and deep in her heart she knew she was destined for something greater than the walls of this palace. She was not just a princess. She was meant to rule. The years passed, and as Cleopatra grew, so did the tensions within her family. Her father's grip on the throne was slipping, and soon the battles for power would begin. But for now, in these quiet moments, she was still a girl with a mind sharper than a blade, a girl who would one day become Egypt's most legendary queen. Nice. Breathe in deeply now, my friend. Feel the warm Egyptian air, the soft silk of Cleopatra's royal robes, the distant hum of the city at night. Let yourself drift deeper and deeper into the past, into the world of Alexandria, into the life of the girl who would become a queen. The palace in Alexandria was not just a place of gold and marble, not just a place of power and danger. It was also a place of knowledge, a place where the whispers of the past met the voices of the present. And within those grand halls, under the soft glow of oil lamps, Cleopatra studied. She was not like other royal children, content with the luxuries of court life, with silk and fine jewels, with endless feasts and performances. No, Cleopatra's hunger was for knowledge. While others played, she read. While others dreamed of power, she prepared to wield it. She learned to speak not just in the language of her people, but in the tongues of the world: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and more. She understood that a ruler must speak to her subjects, not through interpreters, not through messengers, but with her own voice. She was the first of her dynasty, the Ptolemies, to fully embrace the Egyptian language, to speak to her people in the words of their ancestors, to present herself not just as a foreign queen, but as one of them. Beyond language, she studied science, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The great library of Alexandria, a beacon of wisdom in the ancient world, held texts from the greatest minds, from Euclid, from Archimedes, from Hipparchus. She absorbed them. She did not just learn history, she studied the rise and fall of empires, the strategies of kings, the mistakes that led to ruin. She understood the power of words, the art of persuasion. She trained her voice, not just in language, but in rhetoric. She read the speeches of the great orators of Greece and Rome. She knew that power was not always won with swords, that a carefully chosen phrase, a well-timed smile, a single moment of silence could be as deadly as an army. Then the days in the palace passed, the great columns standing like silent witnesses to her transformation. The Nile flowed steadily, its waters carrying the weight of history, and Cleopatra became something more than a princess. She became a scholar, a strategist, a queen in the making. But knowledge alone would not secure her throne, for beyond the palace walls, beyond the soft glow of candlelight and parchment, danger was growing, and soon the battle for Egypt would begin. The years passed, and the soft glow of childhood began to fade, giving way to something sharper, something more dangerous. The palace, once a place of whispered stories and quiet wonder, became a battlefield of ambition and betrayal. The marble halls, polished smooth by centuries of rulers, now echoed with tense footsteps, with hurried conversations behind closed doors, with the silent calculations of those who wished to rule. Cleopatra was no longer a little girl. She was stepping into the storm of politics, and the air around her was thick with uncertainty. The heat of the Egyptian sun pressed down upon Alexandria, relentless and golden, casting long shadows through the colonnades. The great harbor, where once she had watched ships sail in from distant lands, now felt like a gateway for danger. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was a king, but a weak one. His grasp on the throne was slipping like sand through his fingers. He had spent years desperately clinging to power, making deals with Rome, relying on their military strength to protect him. But alliances built on desperation were fragile. The people of Egypt had not forgotten his failures. His rule had been marked by instability, by heavy taxes, by the ever-present fear that at any moment Rome could decide that Egypt would be better off without him. The air in Alexandria grew heavy with tension, thick like the rising heat of the desert. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, was gone, dead, and in his place the throne did not belong to just one ruler, but to two. Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, were named co-rulers, bound by blood, bound by law, and yet divided by ambition. He was young, barely a boy, and the men around him, the powerful advisors, the generals, the courtiers, saw in him something they could control, a puppet king, a figurehead, a child they could whisper to, a ruler they could shape. But Cleopatra was different. She was no puppet. She had studied too much, seen too much, learned too much. She had no intention of being ruled by men who sat in the shadows, pulling strings. She was the rightful queen of Egypt. She would not share her power, not truly, and she would not bow to those who sought to silence her. And so, in the quiet corners of the palace, the struggle for Egypt began. And it was at first it was subtle, orders ignored, messages delayed, a quiet campaign to weaken Cleopatra's authority. The advisors of Ptolemy XIII, men who had served their own ambitions longer than they had served Egypt, worked against her. They whispered in the boy's ear, feeding him lies, turning him against his sister. They painted her as a danger, as a threat, as someone who would take everything from him. And soon, whispers turned into action. Cleopatra was forced to flee. One night, the halls of the palace that had once been her sanctuary became a place of danger. The same torches that had lit her studies, the same walls that had heard her father's voice, now bore witness to her downfall. She could not stay. She would not survive. So she left Alexandria behind, left behind the throne that should have been hers. She traveled east to Syria, where the air was dry, where the sand stretched endlessly, where she would not be hunted. But she was not running. She was preparing. Because Cleopatra would not accept exile, she would not accept defeat. She would return, She would reclaim what was hers, and she would do so not through war, not through armies alone, but through something far more powerful. She would use the power of Rome, and in the distance, across the sea, beyond the walls of Egypt, a name was already waiting for her. Julius Caesar taught. The wind off the Mediterranean carried the scent of salt and distant land. The waves that had once brought traders, scholars, and kings to Egypt now carried Julius Caesar. Rome had arrived in Alexandria. Cleopatra knew this was her moment. She could not fight her brother's forces alone. She needed power. She needed an ally. And who held more power than Rome itself? But how could she reach Caesar? Alexandria was not safe for her. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, and his advisors controlled the city. They watched for her. They feared her return. If she entered openly, she would be seized. So she did what no ordinary queen would dare. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's palace, wrapped tightly inside a rug. The night was warm, the flickering torches casting long shadows against the wall. The Roman general sat in his chamber, a man whose name echoed through the world, a man who had conquered lands far and wide, but even he was unprepared for what happened next. The rug was unfurled, and from within it, Cleopatra emerged, not just a woman, not just a queen, but a force of nature. The air was thick with unspoken words, with possibilities, with something neither of them could quite name. She stood before him, young, intelligent, fearless. She did not beg. She did not plead. Instead, she spoke, and her voice wove a spell as powerful as any army. She told him of Egypt, of her brother's treachery, of her right to rule. She was not asking for his help. She was offering him a partnership. She knew what Caesar wanted. Power, settled, glory, a legacy that would outlive him. And he listened. Because Julius Caesar was many things. A warrior, a ruler, a man who had seen the world. But in that moment, under the soft glow of oil lamps, in the heart of Alexandria, he saw something different. He saw Cleopatra not just as a queen in exile, but as a woman who could stand beside him, as an equal, and so he agreed. But the battle for Egypt was far from over. Ptolemy XIII would not surrender easily, and soon the streets of Alexandria would run with fire and war. The streets of Alexandria trembled under the weight of war. The scent of smoke filled the air, thick and bitter, as fires raged along the waterfront. Julius Caesar had chosen Cleopatra, and for that choice, the city burned. Ptolemy XIII and his forces, backed by his advisors and the royal army, refused to surrender. They saw Caesar's arrival not as fate, but as an invasion, a Roman taking sides in an Egyptian war. And so, battle erupted. The great library of Alexandria, a beacon of knowledge for the world, was caught in the flames. Scrolls filled with centuries of wisdom, words of philosophers, scientists, and poets, gone, lost to the chaos of war. The city itself seemed to weep, its streets filled with cries of battle, the clash of swords, the pounding of feet against stone. But Cleopatra and Caesar stood firm. But inside the royal palace, Cleopatra watched the war unfold. She knew what was at stake: her throne, her future, her very life. Caesar's forces, though smaller, were skilled, disciplined. They fought with precision, pushing back Ptolemy's army. Days passed. The Nile, once a river of life, now carried the weight of the fallen. And then, finally, it ended. Ptolemy XIII, desperate and defeated, tried to flee across the river. But the Nile does not favor the weak. His boat overturned, and the young king, once a boy who had been shaped by fear and ambition, drowned in its depth. With his death, the war was over, and Cleopatra was queen. She did not share her rule anymore, not with a brother, not with advisors who whispered against her. She was the sole ruler of Egypt, and at her side, for now, stood Julius Caesar. But Rome was not a land that let its leaders stay away for long, and soon Caesar would have to leave. The golden sun hung low over the Nile, its shimmering reflection dancing upon the waters as Cleopatra sat upon her throne. Not as a queen in exile, not as a ruler in peril, but as the undisputed queen of Egypt. I know him. But even as she basked in her victory, she knew that power was fleeting. Rome was a force that shaped the world, and Julius Caesar, the man who had helped secure her throne, was still at its heart. Then, their alliance had grown into something deeper, something that went beyond mere politics. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers, their fates entwined in ways neither could have foreseen. And soon she bore him a son, a child born of two worlds, Egyptian by blood, Roman by destiny. She named him Ptolemy 15 Philopator Caesar. But to the world, he would be known by a simpler name, Caesarion, the little Caesar. To Cleopatra, he was the future. A child who could one day unite Rome and Egypt, who could bring together two of the greatest empires the world had ever known. A ruler greater than any before him. But Rome had its own plan. The news arrived like a cold wind sweeping through the halls of her palace. Caesar had been assassinated, stabbed by his own senators, betrayed in the heart of Rome. Cleopatra's hands clenched the message as she read it, her mind reeling. The man who had helped her reclaim Egypt, the father of her child, the most powerful man in the world, gone. And with his death, the world shifted. Rome was in chaos. Power was up for the taking. But who would rise? Who would rule? And more importantly, what would this mean for Cleopatra and her son? The warm winds of Egypt carried the scent of blooming lotus flowers. But inside Cleopatra's palace, the air was heavy with uncertainty. Julius Caesar was dead. Rome had turned against its own leader, and now the future was unclear. What would become of Caesarion? What would become of Egypt? Cleopatra knew that in the world of politics, power never stood still. A new ruler would rise in Rome, and she had to act quickly to secure her place. She watched from afar as Rome fell into chaos. Mark Antony, a loyal general of Caesar, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, fought for control. The empire was no longer whole. It was divided, and that division was her opportunity. And so, when the time was right, she set sail. Her grand ship, adorned with silk sails and golden embellishments, glided across the Mediterranean. She was not a queen who begged for alliances. She was a queen who commanded them. Her destination? Tarsus. For there, waiting for her, was Mark Antony. The waters of the Cydnus River shimmered under the golden sun as Cleopatra's grand ship sailed toward Tarsus, where Mark Antony awaited. But she did not arrive as a desperate queen seeking an alliance. She arrived as a goddess. Her ship was a vision. Its sails dyed deep purple, the color of royalty, the color of wealth. The air was thick with the perfume of incense and burning myrrh, its fragrance drifting toward the shore before she even set foot on land. Golden oars dipped into the river. moving like the hands of fate, steady, certain. And there she sat, upon a throne of silk and gold, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love herself. Mark Antony had seen many things in his life. He had fought wars. He had ruled lands. He had stood beside Caesar himself. But as he stood on the riverbank watching Cleopatra approach, he had never seen anything like this. She did not bow to him. She did not rush to his side. Instead, she summoned him to her, and he came, under the glow of oil lamps and the soft murmur of lutes. They dined that night, the air between them electric with something unspoken. Cleopatra did not beg for his favor. She did not need to. Instead, she laughed, she challenged, she captivated. She knew Antony's weaknesses, his love for pleasure, for wine, for boldness, and she played to them perfectly. That night, the world shifted once more. Cleopatra had won Mark Antony. But their love was not just a romance. It was an alliance, a partnership that would shake the very foundations of Rome itself. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years. Cleopatra and Mark Antony were no longer just lovers. They were rulers bound by fate. In Alexandria, they built a world of luxury and power. Antony, once a Roman general, now lived as an Egyptian king. He dressed in silk, feasted in marble halls, and drank from goblets of gold. He was no longer just a soldier of Rome. He was Cleopatra's equal, her partner, her warrior. Together they ruled over the eastern half of the Roman Empire. They had wealth, they had armies, and soon they had children. 3 of them. Their love was not a secret. It was a spectacle. In Alexandria, they formed a court unlike any other. Banquets stretched long into the night. Music filled the air, and the people adored their queen and her Roman consort. But Rome was watching. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, saw Antony not as a ruler, but as a traitor. How could a Roman abandon Rome for an Egyptian queen? How could a Roman share power with a foreign woman? The whispers turned to speeches. The speeches turned to outrage. And soon, war was coming. The tides of war had begun to rise. Octavian, the ruler of Rome, declared Antony a traitor. He told the people that Cleopatra had bewitched him, that Egypt was stealing Rome's power, that Antony was no longer a Roman, but a servant of a foreign queen. It was not just a battle for power. It was a battle for the future of an empire. And so the armies gathered. On one side, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, rulers of the East, with the wealth of Egypt behind them. On the other, Octavian, the ruler of Rome, with legions hardened by war. The battle would be fought not on land, but on the open sea at Actium. The morning of the battle, the winds blew strong over the Ionian water. Cleopatra and Antony stood upon their flagship, the Egyptian banners high, the golden prows of their warships cutting through the waves. Their fleet was mighty, their warriors ready, but Octavian's fleet was larger, faster, and he had a secret weapon. His commander, Agrippa, a man who knew the sea like no other. The battle began. Ships clashed, fire spread. The sounds of battle echoed across the water. Cleopatra watched from her flagship, her heart pounding. And then, something changed. Antony's fleet was struggling. Octavian's ships moved faster, trapping them, cutting off their escape. The battle was slipping from their grasp. Cleopatra made a decision. She gave the order. Her fleet would retreat. With the Egyptian ships turning away, Antony saw the sails of Cleopatra's vessel moving towards safety. He could not bear to lose her, and so he abandoned the battle. He turned his ship away from the fight and followed Cleopatra, leaving his men behind, leaving the war behind. He chose love over victory. But Rome did not forgive. Octavian crushed the remaining forces. Egypt was now within his reach. Winds carried Antony and Cleopatra back to Alexandria, but they did not bring hope. The city was quiet. The people of Egypt, once full of joy and celebration, now watched in silence. They knew what was coming. The power of Rome was unstoppable. Octavian was marching toward them, and there would be no mercy. Inside the palace, Antony was a man broken. He had lost the battle. He had lost his honor. He had abandoned his men. Rome would never forgive him. His name, once spoken with pride, was now whispered in disgrace. Cleopatra, though her heart ached, did not weep. She could not afford to. She had spent her life surviving, and she would survive this too. She locked herself away in her most private chamber, surrounded by her closest servant. She devised a plan. She sent word to Antony, a lie. She told him she was dead. News shattered him. Antony, the warrior, the Roman general, the man who had fought alongside Caesar, could not imagine a world without Cleopatra. He could not live in a world without her. And so he fell upon his own sword, but the wound did not take him immediately. He bled, his breath shallow, his strength fading, and then, through the corridors of the palace, a voice called for him. Cleopatra was alive. His last moments were spent in her arms. She held him, whispering words of love, of sorrow, of regret. The world outside was falling apart. But in that moment, there was only them. Then, Antony was gone. The halls of the palace were silent. Cleopatra stood alone. Antony was gone. Her kingdom was lost. And outside the walls, Octavian was coming. She could hear the distant sound of Roman soldiers, their boots against the marble floors, their voices low and cold. They were not coming to kill her. No, they were coming to take her. Octavian did not want Cleopatra dead. He wanted her as a prisoner, a trophy, a queen dragged through the streets of Rome in chains, paraded before the people, humiliated before the empire. But Cleopatra was no prisoner. She was no trophy. She had spent her life ruling as a queen, and she would not end it as a captive. She sent for a basket of figs, and inside it, hidden beneath the fruit, was death itself, a small coiled asp, its venom swift and silent. She dressed herself in her finest robes, the silk flowing around her like water. She adorned herself with gold and jewels, not for vanity, but for power. If she was to die, she would die as she had lived, a queen. And then she reached for the axe. The serpent struck, a sharp sting, a whisper of pain. The poison moved through her veins, slow and sure. Her breathing softened, her eyelids grew heavy. The gold in the light of Alexandria, the sound of the sea, the scent of myrrh and lotus, all of it faded, and then there was nothing. Cleopatra was gone, but her legend would live forever. And now, my dear friend, as you rest, may peace surround you like the gentle waves upon the shore. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his light shine upon you, filling your heart with comfort and your dreams with serenity. Just as Cleopatra's story has been told for centuries, your own journey is unfolding in the hands of God. He knows every step you take, every burden you carry, and every hope that fills your heart. So sleep now in his grace. May his love be a shield around you, his peace a river that calms your soul. Good night, dear friend. May the Lord watch over you as you sleep, and may you wake with joy in his presence. Rest well. You are loved.